Lasers are amazing tools, but do they take away what makes leathercraft craft? Here are two identical pocket organizers I made using a laser. This one in my left hand, if I was being honest, I'd say is no more than 40% handmade. However, this one in my right hand, I would have no problem labeling it as 100% handmade. Again, both made using the same exact laser. Today, I'm going to show you an easy way to harness the precision of a laser, all while still keeping the values of handmade traditional leathercraft. And to do that, I'll be using my trusty Xtool P2 and some natural veg tan leather. However, this will work with any laser engraver in any type of leather that you want to use. Moving over into Xtool Creative Space, which is the software that operates the P2, you can see I have a nice image of my leather right here on the middle of my screen. Makes it super easy for laying out all of your different pattern pieces for doing your work. Now, what I'm going to show you is how I use the laser to plot out all of the given pattern pieces of any specific project on the leather so that I can then take that leather and cut and punch everything by hand if I want to keep that handmade feel. Because yes, I could just use the laser to cut out all the stitching holes and cut out all of the pieces, and I do that a lot, but I agree with the critics in saying that it's a little bit soulless. You're outsourcing a good amount of the hard work to the laser, which, you know, it has its pros and cons and it has its place, but there's sometimes when you want to keep that fully handmade feel. So what we're going to use the laser to do is just trace our design on the leather so that we can then go back and punch all those holes. This is going to replace any need for you to have a cardstock pattern or an acrylic pattern, so you have to go and trace everything by hand, in which case it does take quite a long amount of time. This is really fast, and this is also way more precise than you will ever be tracing your patterns by hand, which gives you a nice, perfect starting point and keeps your projects looking great. First step, I need to import the SVG file for this organizer design. This is the same exact SVG file that I have for sale on my website, so if you want to try this out yourself, there's a link in the video description below. All right, this is a little difficult to see with black, so I'm going to move this to a different layer. And first thing I need to do is get rid of this text down here at the bottom. You know, I don't know what type of laser software people are using, so I have to add a bunch of disclaimers for different things. All right, so here are our two pieces of our organizer design. And I know that they fit horizontally like this on my leather. I'm not really trying to, maximize yield here, but, you could get really precise with where you're cutting this out, which saves a lot of leather. Next, we have to instruct our laser to just trace the outline of our pattern, which is not something that you see a lot. If you're newer to lasers, they only have a couple different functions. In our case here, the first would be we could laser cut this design out of the leather. It's pretty self-explanatory. The second would be we could engrave this design on the surface of our leather, in which case, technically that would work. We could use the engraving to use our knife to cut everything out. However, that would take a really, really long time to process. And the third is called line scoring, and that's what we're going to be using. Line scoring is technically a cutting operation, but done at a much lower power and a much faster speed. Let me show you an example here. So if I were to cut this out of leather, which I do often, I've come up with settings for this laser that I like, where I run it at 80% power and 25 millimeters per second speed. So relatively high power and a relatively low speed. Now, if I want to just trace this design on my leather, the settings I came up with were 3% power and 235 millimeters per second speed. So that laser is moving a lot faster across our leather at a much lower power. So instead of cutting through the leather, all it does is leaves a nice, precise line in its place. And the cool thing is when you really dial in your settings, that little score line will actually leave a little cut in the leather where you can just nicely fit your knife blade in there and nicely fit the edges of your pricking irons or your chisels or whatever you're using. So it really It really helps you align those things when you're cutting them out. Quick note on stitching holes before we run this. So for mine here, I'm using my 6mm Space Cinnabrox, which have a 1.2 diameter hole. When you're plotting your stitching holes, number one, you have to measure the distance between the points of your stitching holes, your markings. Not every manufacturer notes that distance, so you want to go ahead and physically measure the distance between point to point. And two, what you want to do is you want to press lightly into the leather and try to replicate that exact mark in your design program. Not the mark that you get when you completely punch everything through, because that's going to be larger than what our starting point is going to be. We just need it, what it looks like when you have it lightly pressed into the leather. So what I did was I took my Cinnabrox and I just pressed it into some leather, and then I measured that little hole diameter, which came out to about 1.1, 1.2 millimeters as it said it would. Because you want to make sure not to do the fully expanded hole size, because that's going to be too large and you'll see that line. And if you're interested in learning how I design patterns like this with perfectly placed stitching holes, whether it be round holes or diamond holes or slanted holes, whatever, I have a quick little 2-hour mini course on how I design in Illustrator. There's a link to that in the video description below as well. But in any case, let's run this. The best way to figure out whether your score line is too light or too heavy is to first see if there's any smoke being generated. You can see inside of my laser bed here, I have next to no visible smoke being generated from this process. Also, make sure that there is actually a line being generated. So if you're moving too fast, you're going to see a lot of little individual dots instead of a solid line. But we also want to make sure that the laser is not leaving too much scorching as it turns the corner. And you can see here that it's very minimal, even using natural veg tan, which I consider the final boss of laser work because it just shows all of the burn marks so visibly. After I'm finished, I always like to do a little post-laser cleanup, so I'll take a soft horsehair brush and just gently brush any of that surface level soot that might be laying on top of the surface, because once you start handling it, you're going to start pushing it into the pores of the leather, and that's no good. At this point, you're ready to start cutting out your pieces the same way you would as if you traced it with a scratch awl. If you have a really good score line setting, your knife blade should fit right into the little groove. All right, while I'm finishing up this organizer, I'll run through my shop updates for the week. Lots of things in motion. I'm expecting 2 deliveries today. The first is the Buckle Guy 4-ton clicker press, and the second is the hot stamping machine from Dream Factory, all the way in South Korea. Somehow they're both arriving on the same day, within the same hour, and I haven't made any space for them, so I'm gonna have to do that after I edit this video. Scratch that. While I was recording, the clicker press showed up a lot smaller than I was expecting. Anyways, on Monday, I'm getting a big leather delivery from Italy. Super excited to get my hands on that. Outside of that, just spending a lot of money right now. I've been working on a new project, a new phase of Make Supply, and it's been in the planning stages for the past couple months, talking to suppliers and manufacturing people and packaging people, and, you know, just spending a lot of money to get things in motion, but they're finally starting to materialize. And I will be sharing all of this with you on the channel because I'm going to document everything that's happening with that project on the channel. So I'll talk more about that. I'll also do a review and a run through of the clicker press and the hot stamping machine for anyone that's interested in my thoughts. So yeah, if you want to try out this pattern, I have it available on my site in all formats. So print ready PDF, laser ready files, as well as an acrylic template set that I'll cut and ship out to you. If you are interested in learning how I design these patterns in Illustrator, my little 2-hour mini course is on sale right now. And finally, if you're interested in picking up a desktop laser that's great for leather, the one I used in this video here, there's a link in the video description below. I would greatly appreciate if you could use that link. I do have a cordial relationship with Xtool, the company that makes them, and they kick me back a couple bucks every time someone buys one using the link. And that helps me pay for everything I've got going on here, make new patterns, make new videos, feed my children, you know. So I'll catch you next time.